Probably. So you're a mutt too.
Yes, I am.
Indeed. We good to go, Big Cat?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you all for coming after a week off. Tonight we are in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. We'll probably be here for a few weeks, but it's where we are for tonight too. Genesis 6, 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. It's the word of God. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for an opportunity to be here with my brothers and sisters, to explore your word, Lord, to hear you speak. I pray that by your Spirit, Lord, you would instill in us an understanding of what you're communicating here, Lord, and how that affects the history of redemption and all the Bible, God. Just give us eyes to see and ears to hear, Lord, minds to understand, and through it all, give us hearts to love you more. We pray in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. All right, so these 4 verses is a highly disputed passage among modern Christians, though less so among biblical scholars. And I think that part of the reason Christians are so divided on this is that Christianity has removed or ignored so many of the spiritual elements of our faith because, especially in the Western world, we tend to want what's practical. We want to know how to live in the world as Christians, and I get that. But the fact of the matter is that it's very important to know what it is God is communicating in this passage. That's every passage, right? Because the Bible is a unified whole. And if we misunderstand one thing, especially something early in history, like here in Genesis, then we'll misunderstand every reference that's made back to it. We'll miss important themes that run throughout the whole Old Testament, and we'll misunderstand the New Testament. Even more, we'll misunderstand the spiritual warfare we are called to. So this is a very important part of redemptive history in this passage. So there are a few questions we have to answer in this text to understand what's going on. We need to know who the sons of God are, we need to know who the Nephilim are, and we need to know what it means that they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat what's going on here, and then we'll work our way through to see why that's the case. This is describing a second divine rebellion. The first rebellion was Satan in the garden when he rebelled against God. And this is similar in that heavenly beings disobey God, and they do something they're forbidden to do. What they do here is they take on physical form, which they do elsewhere in the Old Testament. We see that a lot. But they rebel in that they actually procreate with human women. And these women have children, and these children are giants, physical, mighty giants. That's who the Nephilim are, the offspring of heavenly beings and human women. And they're physical beings who can physically die, just like a human, but their spirit is not just human. Right? They're part human, part heavenly being in their spirit, because heavenly beings are spiritual, and man is part spiritual. And the fact that these Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward is speaking of before and after the flood. Because the flood comes after this and wipes out the Nephilim, but there was one or maybe even multiple subsequent rebellions where this same thing happened, and that's why we see Nephilim later in the Old Testament. This, what I just told you, this is the primary view of the early church up until the time of St. Augustine. This is the only view of the Jews up to the time of Christ and beyond. This is the view of most Bible scholars that I have read, with the notable exception of R.C. Sproul, who believes an alternative view. What is the alternative view? Well, the alternative view teaches that the sons of God are men in the line of Seth, and the daughters of men are women from the line of Cain. Now, we've spoken at length about the spiritual nature of those two lines, as they're presented in the previous 2 chapters. So the idea in this view is that these 2 lines, the lines of the elect and the lines of the reprobate, intermarry, and they have offspring, which confuses or intermingles the 2 lines. This, then, is the impetus for God sending the flood to wipe out most of humanity that is now intermingled, and then he begins again with Noah. But if that is the case, then we're left with 2 questions. First, why would the line of Cain procreating with the line of Seth produce giants? Second, even if men from Seth's line having babies with women from Cain's line produce these giants, How would they have been on the earth in those days and also afterwards? Because we come across them after the flood. How is this when the line of Cain is literally destroyed in the flood? And there are answers to these questions that are offered to me unconvincingly, like saying the Nephilim aren't giants, but it's just an unholy fallen mixed breed. And the etymology of the word Nephilim is disputable, so this can't be disproven by the grammar here. But I don't think the Bible allows for that answer. As for how they existed after the flood, those who accept this view have to say that either Noah's wife was of the line of Cain, or that one of Noah's daughters-in-law was of the line of Cain. And again, this can't be disproven with a chapter and verse that says otherwise, but this would lead me to expect at least there'd be a lot more Nephilim in the world after the flood. So let's go to the Bible to see a few things. What does the Bible say about the Nephilim? Well, the Bible only uses the word Nephilim 3 times, and it's only in 2 verses. Here in Genesis 6, and twice in Numbers 13:33. And Numbers 13 is the passage where the spies return from the promised land, and they're afraid to take the land. So let's go to Numbers 13. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, and besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along with Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land when they had spied out, saying, and this is the important part, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." So these people of great height that scare the Israelites are called the Nephilim. They're also here referred to as the sons of Anak, and we see the sons of Anak, or the Anakim, a bunch in the story of the conquest of the Promised Land. They're actually one of the peoples that God commands to be wiped out. We read a little about them in Deuteronomy 2, as Moses recounts what Israel had already done in preparation for taking the Promised Land. This is what Moses says here. I apologize for the extended passage. Deuteronomy 2, beginning in verse 8. "So we went on away from our brothers, the people of Esau, who live in Seir, away from the Arabah road from Elath and Ezion-Geber. And we turned and went in the direction of the wilderness of Moab. And the Lord said to me, 'Do not harass Moab or contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar to the people of Lot for a possession.' The Amim formerly lived there, a people great and many, as tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. The Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place, as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them. Now rise up and go over the brook Zered." So we went over the brook Zered, and the time from our leaving Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the brook Zered was 38 years, until the entire generation, that is the men of war, had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them. For indeed the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from the camp until they had perished. So as soon as all the men of war had perished and were dead from among the people, the Lord said to me, "Today you are to cross the border of Moab at Ar. And when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, do not harass them or contend with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot for a possession. It is also counted as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzummim, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place, as he did for the people of Esau who lived in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place even to this day." Probably all read this, read right past all these crazy names, but I want us to notice a few things here. This is God telling Israel not to take certain lands. The lands of Edom, the lands of Adam, and the land of Ammon, and the land of Moab, because they're all relatives of Israel. But also notice that each of them, when they took the land that God allotted to them, had to destroy the inhabitants of the land, and they were all giants. Edom destroyed the Horites, Ammon destroyed the Zamzummim, Moab destroyed the Amim. all of who share two things in common with the Anakim. First, they're very tall, and second, they are considered, what we read here, Rephaim. Okay, so the Anakim, who are Nephilim, really tall, are called here Rephaim, along with these other ancient giants, all of whom God has not just Israel, but even Edom and Moab and Ammon destroyed. We're getting to a point here. Of course, the Rephaim are a people that God told Abraham currently dwelt in the land he was giving to his offspring. When God makes the covenant with Abraham, this is what we read. When the sun got down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cabanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. And what's to notice here is that all of the names of these people are actually in the singular in Hebrew. It's a collective singular referring to the whole of a people. Like if we said America, all of America did something. It would refer to all the people of the one nation. The only exception here is the Rephaim. This is a plural now, as in not one nation to represent, but a type of person that is among those in all of these lands. And that's because there were multiple Rephaim among all the different nations that Israel had to destroy, like Og, king of Bashan. As Moses continues recounting Israel's exploits in Deuteronomy 3, we read this. Then we turned and went up the way to Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon. So the Lord our God gave into our hand Og also, the king of Bashan, and all his people. And we struck him down until he had no survivor left. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city that we did not take from them. 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og of Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, beside very many unwalled villages. And we devoted them to destruction, as we did to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, devoting to destruction every city, men, women, and children. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as our plunder. So we took the land of that time out of the hand of the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians called Hermon Sirion, while the Amorites call it Senir. All the cities of the tableland and all Gilead and all Bashan, as far as Salach and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og of Bashan. For only Og, the king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit. We'll come back to a lot of this next week. But notice here that Og was a remnant of the Rephaim in Bashan. And his bed's described for us. It's 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. That's a big dude. We also read later that Israel was almost successful in obeying God and wiping out the Anakim. We read in Joshua 11. There was none of the Anakim left in the land, meaning the promised land, of the people of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod, and some remain. And since we're just finishing up our series through the books of Samuel on Sunday mornings, I'm sure you all know these 3 cities are cities of the Philistines. You also know that among the Philistines, there were a whole bunch of giants. Goliath was a Rephaim. We read of other giants that battled against Israel. We saw a few weeks ago on Sunday, there's 4 different battles with 4 different descendants of the giants. And in 2 Samuel, the writer uses the word Rapha. The only 4 times the word's used, and it's the singular of where we get the word Rephaim. That's used in the parallel account in 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles 20, and after this there arose war with the Philistines at Gezer. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sippai, who was one of the descendants of the giants, and the Philistines were subdued. That word giants is the word Rephaim, because the Rephaim lived among the Philistines because the Anakim settled there when Israel didn't destroy them all, and they were Rephaim because they were also Nephilim. Again, Numbers 13. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. Okay. 2 things to notice in all of this. First, there is no doubt that the Nephilim are physical giants. But second, note that with Israel, and even with Edom, and with Moab, and with Ammon, God wasn't just giving land to Abraham's offspring and his family. He was using the taking of the land to judge the Nephilim. Okay, just as the curse of Satan included a promise for Adam and Eve, so the punishment of the Nephilim included the land promised for Israel and those other nations. And there's a reason God punished the Nephilim. But before we get to that, understanding the Nephilim were giants, we have to answer the question why they were giants. And as I said, it's because they were the offspring of humans and heavenly beings. Again, Genesis 6, when man began to multiply in the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And we don't work backwards from the fact of the Nephilim to deduce that the sons of God are heavenly beings. It's because we have to understand who the sons of God are to explain why the Nephilim are part human being and part heavenly being. We begin by looking at every other place the term son of God is used in the Old Testament. Okay? There's internal evidence in the Bible that makes this much more than just a matter of opinion. The sons of God always refers to heavenly beings. Like when we read in Job 1, that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Nobody interprets this to mean that the human line of Seth presented themselves to God in heaven. They don't do it the second time we read that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. We talked months ago about the fact of the creation of the heavenly beings, even though Genesis doesn't touch on it. We discussed that the heavenly beings were created before the earth was finished because God asked Job in Job 38, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched a line upon it? On what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God sounded for joy. And we saw there the reference to the stars and the sons of God was referring to heavenly beings. Or we have Psalm 29, where we read, ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. This is a place where interpretation is in translation, because even though this is a good interpretation, the Masoretic text doesn't say heavenly beings. It says sons of God. And we read this in the Psalms a few times, where in Hebrew it says sons of God, and we read heavenly beings. Even in the New Testament, we see the same understanding. From the mouth of Jesus himself, we see how sons of God are understood as heavenly beings. When he answered the Sadducees' ridiculous question about the 7 brothers who die, each having the same wife, he says to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore, for they are equal to angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. And sons of God are what in Greek would be called angels, which are heavenly beings. And then we have the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, older than the Masoretic text. This would have been the Bible Jesus and the apostles had. This is what we read in Genesis 6 in the Septuagint. And it happened when human beings began to become numerous upon the land, and they had daughters. The angels of God, having seen the daughters of humans, that they were beautiful, took for themselves women from all whom they picked out. The Lord God said, my breath will not at all reside in these humans for very long, because they are flesh, but their days will be 120 years. Now, giants were upon the land in those days. And after that, whenever the sons of God visited the daughters of humans, they fathered children for themselves. Those are the giants who were from long ago, the people of renown. Clearly, the sons of God and angels are the same thing. So, we now know that the sons of God in Genesis 6 refer to heavenly beings. And that's important because we now understand this to be speaking of a rebellion of heavenly beings against God. And without this understanding, we're actually going to miss the third major rebellion against God, which we'll see in Genesis 11. And this is referred to in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, where we read, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, but the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is allotted heritage. We'll get to that in Genesis 11. I just want to realize that a lot of what Moses wrote in Genesis, like the creation account, like here in Genesis 6, it's not just written to give Israel a history. It's not just to tell them what the truth is. But Moses writes this to explain to them the truth in light of what the rest of the world believed, right? We've spoken about this. The Old Testament takes place in 3 major locales: Egypt, the Promised Land, and Mesopotamia. And as we might suspect, these other ancient cultures all have stories about heavenly beings descending from heaven to have children with human women. And after they did this, the offspring were born, and they were giants. And in every single one, God sends a huge flood as judgment for this. So this explains why the Jews never adopted a view that the sons of God were human. It explains why all Second Temple Jewish writings, which means from the time of the exile up until after Jesus' time, always understood this to mean heavenly beings. This is most evident in the book of Enoch. The first 36 chapters of the book of Enoch are known as the book of Watchers. Watchers were heavenly beings who were part of a divine council of God. We actually read about them in the Bible. In Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he explains it to Daniel. He says, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump of its root in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers. The decision is by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar is a Mesopotamian king, but he's saying this to Daniel, who is a Jew and who is a prophet, and he shares this theology of these heavenly beings. Daniel says, because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump, everything we just read. Daniel says, it is a decree of the Most High which has come upon my lord the king. You shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox. You shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. So these watchers, these holy ones, are heavenly beings. So in the book of Watchers, we read of Enoch's calling to be a mediator. It's the same Enoch we saw, 7th from Adam, taken up to heaven. We read of Enoch's calling to be a mediator of sorts between God and the rebellious heavenly beings from Genesis 6. And we read in Enoch 6, and it happened that when the sons of men multiplied in those days, they begat good and beautiful daughters. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and longed for them and said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves women from among the people and bring forth for ourselves children. And Semyaza, who was their ruler, said to them, I fear you may not wish to do this deed, and I alone will be responsible for a great failure. Therefore they all answered him, let us all swear by an oath and devote one another to mutual destruction, not to turn back from this decision until we complete it and do this deed. Then they all made a vow together and put each other under a curse in regards to this. Now, remember what we talked about way back when we discussed what the knowledge of good and evil was from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Remember how Satan told Adam and Eve they would be like gods, like the heavenly beings in knowing good and evil when they ate of the tree. And we saw knowing good and evil was understanding the results of sin and the spiritual death that came from it. And I said the heavenly beings would know what the results were. Here we see the heavenly beings, because they know what it will mean, they make a pact together to rebel against God. And then from there, there's a few chapters talk about the results of the offspring of these beings being born, and then God decrees judgment for them. Enoch chapter 10. Then the Most High, the great Holy One, spoke about these things, and he sent Israel to the son of Lamech and said, say to him on my behalf of my name, hide yourself, and reveal to him the end that is coming, that the whole earth is destroyed, and a flood is about to happen among all the earth and utterly destroy everything that is in it, and teach him that he should flee, and his seed will remain in all the generations of the ages. And he said to Raphael, who was an archangel, bind Azael hand and foot and throw him into the darkness, open the desert that is in the Duodel, and throw him there, and place under him the rugged and sharp stones, and let darkness cover him. Let him live there forever. Cover up his appearance, let no light be seen. So we read here, God sends an angel to the son of Lamech, or in Genesis, Lamech. His son is, of course, Noah. He tells the angel to warn him that the flood is coming, and it's judgment for what these watchers did. Then we read of this Azael being thrown into Sheol. Azael was the chief of the rebellious angels. We'll return to him next week or maybe the week after. But for now, there are 2 things to notice. That the angels that mated with the women are sent directly to hell, and those that took part in this rebellion are in hell just awaiting the final judgment. Second, Note that though we do not consider the book of Enoch a canonical book, it is part of a Septuagint, and again, that is the Bible Jesus and the apostles had. So this is part of what the apostles believed. This divine rebellion and the third divine rebellion were a major part of their worldview. It's this second rebellion that we're looking at here in Genesis 6. This is what Peter's talking about when he says in 2 Peter 2, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly," okay? This is Peter's understanding of Genesis 6. These angels sinned, God sent them in hell waiting for the final judgment, but he doesn't stop there. He actually ties in the sin of these angels and the judgment of the flood with the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah and the judgment they endured. Continuing. "If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds that he saw and heard, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passions and despise authority. Bold and willful, they do not tremble as they blaspheme the glorious ones." He's talking about both human and heavenly beings suffering the same fate for sin. And part of that sin, as we see, is despising authority or rebelling against proper authority. We'll see more of this when we get to the third rebellion. But that the sin in Genesis 6, Peter understood it to be a sexual sin of angels, is clear here. And it's also part of Jude's worldview. Jude, verses 6 and 7. "And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." The apostles understood what was going on in Genesis 6. But even beyond what we have in our Bible in the Septuagint, we see how Genesis 6 was understood by Israelites in other places, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the scroll that's called the Damascus document. And we read, "So now, my children, listen to me, that I may uncover your eyes to see and to understand the deeds of God, choosing what pleases him and hating what he rejects, living perfectly in all his ways, not turning away through thoughts caused by the sinful urge and lecherous eyes. For many have gone astray by such thoughts, even strong and doughty men of old faltered through them and still do. When they went about in their willful heart, the guardian angels of heaven fell and were ensnared by it. They did not observe the commandments of God. Their sons, who were as tall as cedars and whose bodies were as big as mountains, fell by it. Everything mortal on dry land expired and became as if they had never existed, because they did their own will and did not keep the commandments of their Maker until finally his anger was aroused against them." Even later, in the works of Josephus, he was a Jewish historian. He was actually born after Christ died. We see how the Jews still understood this. He says, "For many angels of God accompanied with women and begat sons that proved unjust and despisers of all that was good on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For the tradition is, these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians call giants. But Noah was very uneasy at what they did, and being displeased at their conduct, persuaded them to change their dispositions and their acts for the better. But seeing that they did not yield to him, but were slaves to their wicked pleasures, he was afraid they would kill him together with his wife and children, and those they had married, so he departed out of that land. Now God loved this man for his righteousness, that he not only condemned those other men for their wickedness, but determined to destroy the whole race of mankind, and to make another race that should be pure from wickedness, and, cutting short their lives, and making their years not so many as they formerly lived, but 120 only, he turned the dry land into sea, and thus were all these men destroyed, but Noah alone was saved." So notice something here interesting. Josephus has the same view of what happens here in Genesis 6 and why that's the impetus for the flood. But Josephus ties in his second divine rebellion and the existence of the Nephilim with the flood. But he talks about how they're similar to these Grecian giants. He says this actual historical rebellion is similar to Greek mythology. And it is. If you know any Greek mythology, you know there are plenty of stories about gods coming down from heaven and mating with human women. And the result is usually these mighty, gigantic men like Hercules. If you know the story of the Titans, Zeus, the supreme god, tosses a bunch of other gods out of heaven and places them in hell, or what's called Tartarus in Greek. It's a place of punishment in the netherworld. The Titans, according to the myth, are the children of the god Uranus, which means heaven, and Gaia, which means earth. They were the offspring of heaven and earth together. And according to the story, Gaia gets angry when Uranus casts some of the Titans into Tartarus. She convinces some of the remaining Titans to rebel against him. Gaia gives one of them a sickle. He uses it to castrate Uranus. Blood from the wound falls to the earth. Gaia gets pregnant as a result, and giants are born. Later, Zeus, the supreme god, cast all of these giants into Tartarus. See the similarities here. But there's actually more, because the Greek word Tartarus, their netherworld, it's actually used in the Bible, used once by the Apostle Peter in the passage we just looked at. Again, 2 Peter 2, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, it's the only place where the word Tartarus is used and translated as hell. All this to say, the mythology of all of the ancient religions and cultures is based on truth. The myths of the Greek and Roman gods, they are the Elohim of the Bible. The mighty men that were the offspring of their mating with humans, they are the Nephilim and the Rephaim. The Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, for a long time, claimed their kings were descendants of the gods. They may have actually been. We see other kings in and around the Promised Land that were literally offspring of the fallen angels, like Og of Bashan. So these stories are based in truth, just twisted, like the story of the Titans, or the Mesopotamian story of the Apkallu, part human, part god creatures that taught humankind all kinds of advancement in things like war. This is based on truth, just twisted. Here's a summary of the story by Michael Heiser. He says, the Apkallu sought to undermine the wishes of Marduk, that is the supreme god, and his council by ensuring the knowledge that helped create Mesopotamian civilization would survive, allowing humanity to recover from a disaster of a flood. The post-flood Apkallu, warrior sages, they were epic heroes to whom Babylon owed its magnificence. This is what he says. The writer of Genesis didn't see it that way. The transgression of the sons of God in Genesis 6 would eventually produce the greatest threat to capturing the promised land of Canaan, the Nephilim and their descendant giant clans. This point was being communicated by linking the Anakim and the giant clans on both sides of the Jordan to the Nephilim. And he mentions Numbers 13 and Deuteronomy 2 and 3. As the author of Enoch would later put it, the cohabitation offense was acting in the mode of creators, creating living beings in their own image. So all these stories, all the stories of the massive flood that follows, these stories are all true. They're just twisted. And they're not necessarily twisted by man. I think they're twisted by the fallen heavenly beings and their offspring. When man began to multiply in the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. This is the untwisted truth. And that ancient Jews, including Jesus and the apostles, they understood this to be talking about this divine rebellion that resulted in these part human, part heavenly being hybrid giants, means that whether or not we agree on the details, this is the worldview from which they taught and the New Testament is written. You can believe the sons of God are not heavenly beings. You can believe the Nephilim are not giants. That's fine. But the writers of the Bible would disagree. These were just facts to them. Even the Apostle Paul embraced this worldview. We're going to be preaching through 1 Corinthians beginning in the fall. There are a lot of troublesome passages in Hebrews, in 1 Corinthians. Like, did you ever read this verse? When Paul says that is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels, and wonder, what is Paul talking about? This has confused interpreters forever. If we don't read this in light of the rebellion of Genesis 6 and how Paul understands it, we're going to stay confused in this passage. This is how Lawrence Stuckenberg explains this verse. He says, the wearing of head coverings among men in antiquity was not uncommon. The practice among women carried with it strong sexual connotations. Apparel was, of course, one way of marking the difference between the sexes, that is, to keep gender categories distinct. The notion in Greco-Roman antiquity of female vulnerability and inferiority, assumed in many Jewish sources, and the attendant practice of prophylactic head coverings fit well with the early Jewish interpretation of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. With regard to this, New Testament scholars have customarily focused on the essentially evil character of the angels who fell because they were attracted by the beauty of human women. This would be in line with the book of Watchers of Enoch. Paul's reasons for commending head coverings are unable to break away from a deep-seated assumption that women constitute the locus where boundaries between different parts of the cosmos are most likely to be violated. Paul's reference to the angels betrays a subtle warning that more than just social relationships between men and women are at stake. Ultimately, wearing veils is a matter of maintaining the cosmic order to Paul. How do we come to that conclusion? We have to understand Genesis 6 the way Paul did. If we don't know that Paul believed the story of the Watchers, we miss his intentional use of certain language in the book of Galatians. We miss the fact that he tells us the law was given to curb the sinful ways taught to men by the offspring of the Watchers. We'll miss the references to the elemental spirits of the world in Galatians and Colossians, and not understand that the teachings of the Nephilim is in view. We'll miss the cosmic view of sin and judgment that runs throughout all of Paul's letters. We wouldn't understand why Paul warns Timothy about the false teachings of deceitful spirits and demons. We won't be able to make sense of what Peter says when he talks about Christ's death and the resurrection and the time in between, in which Peter says he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. If we don't understand Genesis 6, we won't understand any of this. We won't understand why we read in Job that God puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not pure in his sight, how much less one who is abominable and corrupt, a man who drinks injustice like water. If we don't understand that in Genesis 6 this is sinning angels, we don't understand this. We also won't understand why God tells Israel to wipe out complete societies, men, women, and children. It's because the Rephaim were the greatest threat to them keeping the promised land. And we actually saw this played out through the books of Samuel. See, we need to get this right. The rebellion in Genesis 6 is huge for understanding the history of redemption in the Old Testament. It's huge for understanding New Testament theology. It explains a lot of these really weird passages we can't figure out, so it's important that we get this right. And next week, we're going to explore other ways that Genesis 6 affects other parts of the Bible and the underlying assumptions of the New Testament authors. And we're going to talk a little bit about demons as well. This was just introduction stuff. We'll really get into it next week. Any questions? You don't have to remember most of that. Just know who the sons of God are, who the Nephilim are.
Okay. Yes, they were mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. What are they talking about there? They make it sound like they were heroes or something.
We'll get there.
Really?
Yes. Yes, because the same Hebrew words describing them actually describes Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord.
Right.
And where does he settle?
Nimrod?
Yeah. Babel.
Okay.
What happens at Babel?
Well, Tower of Babel, dispersion.
And it's also where Israel goes into captivity.
Okay.
God sends them back to the scene of the crime. This all ties in together.
Oh, okay.
We'll see that as we go along.
All right, okay. All right. Next, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
So I take that to mean, and a lot of commentators take that to mean, that after the divine rebellion happens, God knows what the result of that's going to be, and it's 120 years from that point to the flood.
Really? Okay, so, yeah, but this divine rebellion wasn't just something that happened in a day.
No, but when it happens, we'll see in the next few weeks.
Oh.
According to Jewish theology, it was the offspring of these, it was the Nephilim,
right,
that corrupted the world to the point where they got as corrupted as they did that God had to send the flood.
And are we Do we believe that all Nephilim were wiped out in the flood, or are they still around? Or?
They were, but they came back, which means that at least one other time it happened again. The angels came and procreated with human women again.
All right, because you said, yes, it was before and after.
Right.
Okay. And are they hanging around now?
I don't think so. So we're going to, we'll get to that. They are not physically hanging around. I'll explain as we go, but we'll see. So when we read of demons
Right.
in the New Testament, when Jesus cast out a demon,
Okay.
that is the Jews believe that was the soul of a Nephilim. Because what happens, the Nephilim get wiped out, but because their bodies are human, right? But their spirits are part divine, part human,
Right.
right? So they don't just die like ours do. They don't just either go to heaven or hell.
Right.
And they actually, the spirits stay, and that is what we would consider demons. If we consider like possession of people, like Satan doesn't do that. Fallen angels don't do that. It's the souls of a Nephilim that do that.
I'm right, because, that's the thing I was wondering about, because they are heavenly beings, and they are part human, part heavenly being. Is there, I'm just throwing it out, but I mean, is there some correlation somehow between them and, or maybe they're a counterfeit of Christ, who is part man, part God?
That's a good question.
Oh, okay, because Satan's kingdom is counterfeit.
Correct.
On the other hand, I don't know, are the Nephilim really, doesn't sound like they are the ones that threw in with Satan per se. They just are separate from the Lord somehow. Or we don't know. We didn't cover that part.
Well, they're evil spirits, but they're the departed souls of Nephilim. So if you believe today, if you believe in, what we would call demonic possession, which I think is a real thing,
Right.
that's not like Satan doesn't possess people. It's not fallen angels that possess people. They're actually souls of the Nephilim.
Souls of the Nephilim. Okay. By the way, when we think about that, how do we tie that into mental illness? Or do you?
Well, I think a lot of mental illness is just a result of the fall. I think we're just broken people, and just like our bodies now break down and we die, I think that our mental health and emotional health deteriorates, and it's not 100% right in any of us, but it's more wrong in some other people.
Right.
I wouldn't run to say that it's always a spiritual attack.
Okay. It is, however, the nature of this world that we live in.
Yeah.
And it is the result of the nature of this fallen world.
Yes.
This fallen world is very stressful now. It seems almost that it is more stressful, as bad as things were in the ancient world and in the past. It seems to me that it's more stressful. And I often think that a lot of the stress comes from the knowledge that it comes from the atomic bomb. I mean, the knowledge that the world could end at any moment. It was said even in ancient times, but now it's a real fact. What do you think?
I think that's part of it. I think today the anxiety and the unhappiness is just because of how much information is constantly coming at us and how much of it is false.
Okay.
I don't think most people are, to me anyway, I could be wrong, but I don't think most people are sitting and are anxious or, have some kind of, mental issue because they're worried that China's going to attack and we're going to get bombed. I think people are more worried about, getting to their phone and the 9 texts they got and looking at their feeds and looking at network news and looking at Fox News and CNN and seeing nothing but the fear-mongering and seeing all this other stuff, and I think that's what has us all anxious. I think we're more worried about our little insignificant lives and all these things going on than we are like, oh, the world's going to end.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I mean, I agree there. I mean, it is, all of that, it creates distress. Yeah, no doubt. Well, and by the way, so, we were talking about, ethnicity. Have you ever, what do you think about DNA? Have you ever found your family line?
Yeah, I did one of those. Ancestry.com.
Okay.
Ancestry.com.
So did I.
I didn't want to do it. My sister wanted to do it, so we both did it.
Okay.
And, if the point of it is to find out where you're from and your DNA, it's pointless because my sister and I have completely different DNA. And this is my sister by birth.
Okay.
Whether we have the same DNA or not, we have the same exact ancestry. And it ain't working out that way. So I don't know. I tend to think everything's a scam.
Okay. I thought about it. Is there a way to, there's some DNA that traces back to the Nephilim, or because I believe that there is, there are people who can trace back their ancestry to the Levitic, to the Levites and the Jewish priesthood.
I think that's probably just more kept generation to generation than it is actually tracing it back.
Oh, you mean?
Most of these places trace back your ancestry to, pick your century, the 18th century, the 17th century. All they're really doing is picking an arbitrary point in time and saying people with a similar DNA code as you, they were all from Austria, or they were all from Kenya, or they were all from, Prussia.
Right.
But it's still an arbitrary point in time, right?
I wasn't sure.
We all go back to Noah, right?
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, because the priesthood could be, for all I know, it could be, they could have a separate DNA. I don't know, but I'm just curious, and that's why I was just asking you if you had thought so or even heard about it. No, not a big deal. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Sure. Check your book there. All the notes. Young lady?
Lorraine, nothing to say about the stress everybody's under?
Actually, I was at the doctor's this morning because I had to get an exam, and one of his assistants comes in. She starts asking me those questions. Do you feel stress? Do you feel like hurting yourself? Do you feel like the world's on your shoulders? Do you, do you watch a lot of television and news? And I kept on going, no. But when she got to the news thing, I said, I don't watch the news anymore. And my nerve and my level of anxiety has gone so much down because I used to take anxiety medicine because I was always watching the news and all the destruction and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if it happens, it happens. I know where I'm going.
I stopped watching the news pre-COVID. But if watching the news during COVID, and the fact that these cable news stations had basically like a death counter ticking up at the top of the screen to keep you glued to the screen, if that didn't convince you, it's all useless.
Yeah, I'm with you. When they started doing that, I said, I don't want to see this. I really don't want to see this. Anyway. She left. We're good.
All right.
You mentioned that R.C. Sproul is his point of view kind of differs from what you were saying, or in other words, he believes in the Seth and Cain. Typically, we kind of follow mostly what R.C. Sproul has to say.
for the most part.
typically. But here we diverge.
Yes. Here in infant baptism, yes.
Okay, all right.
On Saturday, we were, I don't know if you knew what was, Dave,
Dave Langford was teaching,
yeah,
right?
Langford. He gave us a video, did a video for like 40 minutes from
Tim Keller.
Tim Keller. And Tim Keller mentioned something that you sort of touched on, that we now, I can't remember what philosophy or whatever, that we now base a lot of, we're trying to, how do you put it? Science is our new, to explain many things.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to look at, any kind of spiritual, any kind of God thing. We base it on science. And if we have an issue, we look for the answer in science.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we were talking about it now. There would be no scientists in this room right now. Of course, but it's weird.
I love science, but
Me
the
too.
thing about science is it's just like theology. There's good science and there's bad science.
Huh?
And just because it's science doesn't mean it's good.
But he said,
Just because it's theology doesn't mean it's good.
yeah, he said, if you look to the base of all this scientists, there's nothing. They're not holding on to anything. You know what I mean? Like and I was thinking in mathematics, the number 0. There's no. It's not a.
Right, it doesn't, yes.
There's
It
nothing-
represents nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, science, not science is not the be-all and end-all. I think that, to me, is another issue, because I love science,
I do too.
but it's not the be-all and end-all. It is not the answer. Science doesn't always have the answers. Science explores the physical world, and sometimes there's more to it than what we have discovered.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
but
why, and it's always changing, right?
it changes.
Good
yes.
science is willing to be proven wrong, and then you get the better proven facts or,
Sure.
working
Sure.
assumption at that point, right?
Yes.
That's what
yes.
science is supposed to be.
Yes. And by the way, then, what do you think about the science of archaeology? I used to read biblical archaeology, and I felt that, they find a lot that what they're looking for mostly is anything that verifies and confirms what we read in the Bible. And, we find something, they find something, or we find something, and then we find something else, and here and there. And it's not, ultimately, it doesn't include the spiritual
Right.
part, which is, without the spiritual, it's just stuff that's on a page somewhere in a book.
But I do like that archaeology, for the most part, proves the Bible correct.
Yes, yes.
Because it's, that's the thing about the Bible, right? That's the thing about the true God. The God of
Yes.
our religion, as opposed to the God of other religions. He works in space and time in history, right?
Yes.
He didn't show up, he didn't send an angel to one dude sitting in a cave and say, here's the truth.
Yes.
Right? He didn't send golden plates with an angel to Joseph Smith and say, here's, right? It unfolds over all this time. And archaeology, as much as, people want to disprove the Bible and go looking to disprove the Bible, they've still been
that
unable
too.
to do it. What they've been able to do is disprove, working assumptions that people have of the Bible, right?
Right.
Like people
correct.
assumed forever the Exodus was such and such a date. And archaeology says, no, it can't be because this. So then you say, oh, okay, I'll buy that. We must be wrong on the date of the Exodus. Doesn't change that it happens.
No, and it doesn't change what's, it doesn't change the, let's say, the knowledge. And so I'm a little, I'm kind of surprised, and I'm a little taken aback because what we've learned and what I've learned from this, from the Genesis Bible study, it seems very important to understand, to understand and know God. A lot of what we're learning here seems very important to me, and I have the feeling that a lot of people they're not going to get this unless they listen to this Bible study I don't know for sure, but this all seems, a lot of it seems like a revelation for me.
Or do a whole lot of reading.
Well, but it helps to have.
Like I said, most of the stuff I come up with isn't original to me.
Okay. Well, that's great. It seems original. It's original for me, a lot of it.
Well, because a lot of people don't explore these things.
Right.
And a lot of people don't even see whether or not, you're R.C. Sproul and you believe the Seth Cain thing, or you're, any number of other people who believe it's, fallen heavenly beings and Nephilim or giants and all this stuff.
Right.
You still got to believe it's important, right? You'll see that there's a lot of references in the Old Testament and the New Testament that we just don't get unless we look at it in light of this spiritual reality that happens in Genesis 6 and Genesis 11 at Babel. Like, it explains a lot. And this is the worldview of the biblical writers.
Okay.
Right? Up through the end of the New Testament, they would have believed, what we would call angels came down from heaven, had sex with women, giants were born, the flood wiped them out, their souls took possession of people up until the time of Christ, and probably still do. It happened again.
Right. Well, I think one of the first things that, that you said that really was a revelation for me was to think about, the fact that Moses wrote this to inform the Israelites and to inform them about God, to let them know about God, to inform them. I had never thought about it that way. Who was the intended audience, and how did they view it, and how did they view the world then, and the spiritual world as well? I think that for me, that's major. It puts everything in context.
Yeah.
So.
Last chance, Lorraine. Now, let's pray. Good and gracious God, I thank you for tonight, and I thank you for the wonderful conversation. Lord, I thank you. Lord, even though we covered a lot tonight, that we can just grasp the truth of what these verses are saying, Lord, and that we can see that there is evil in the spiritual world, God. It's evil that is against you, that is against us. It's an evil that the writers of the Bible and even the New Testament, Lord, understood. And God, I just pray that we would take it very seriously, that we would know the truth so that we can be prepared to contend for the truth, that we can be prepared to fight against spiritual powers of darkness, Lord, that we can be ready, Lord, to stand strong, Lord, by your Spirit, to defend ourselves and your truth, Lord, against the worlds and evil forces that want it eliminated, God. We just thank you that you have preserved it in your word, that no matter what, Lord, you preserve the remnant of your people, and you will until the end, and we can be sure in that. So God, just strengthen us by your Spirit, Lord. Give us confidence in who you are. Give us confidence that your word is true, Lord, and give us humility, God, to read these things. And if we realize that we're off, or there's a better explanation, or the Bible's more coherent, believing something a different way, Lord, we don't want to stand proud on what we say we believe, Lord. Change our hearts, change our minds, reveal your truth to us, God. That's all we want. So we just thank you for who you are. We love you. We praise you in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.